Yo, what's up guys? So today I want to talk about the best dynamic driver I've ever heard. In 2022, the market had a huge DD phase where sets were coming out left and right, ranging from cheaper releases like the Chu, the 2 Zeros, Cadenza, Warner, Quarks, all the way to the Olina, IE600, and many more. So I got curious and thought, what's the best dynamic driver I've heard so far? In this video, I'm also going to include previous releases, and note that I haven't heard any of the super expensive DDs like the Illuminations, Zen Pro, or Twilight, which is why I'm going to cap the price at the most expensive set I had my hands on, which is the Sennheiser IE600. So let's just jump right into it. My favorite dynamic driver under $700 is the MIM Dark Magician. Now I know many of you guys are probably thinking, Dark Magician? Isn't that a Pokemon? But let me tell you why this set is so special. First, it was a limited run, so it's now officially discontinued and you just can't get it anymore. Second, Ethan handmade all the sets by himself. And third, and most importantly, I never heard a tuning as unique as this. And it's also called the Dark Magician, so that's plus 100 cool points right there. Now before I go into show mode, let me explain the criteria I used to decide this. As you all may know, this hobby is highly subjective and depends on what aspect of an IEM you value the most. So for example, I prioritize vocals, staging, and scaling the most. So for vocals, I'm looking for a very forward and textured presentation that's true to life, but also not harsh at higher volumes, which is actually very difficult to achieve because many companies tune their IEMs with a lot of upper mids to make the vocals more forward, but as a result of this, it makes it sound sharp and fatiguing, while boosting the treble will make it sound too thin and light. Now this wouldn't be that much of an issue if we're talking mid or normal volume of listening, but since I value immersion and scaling, I listen above the normal volume at around 80 to 85 decibels plus, and at that volume, most IEMs pretty much kill my ears. For example, I have issues with all of the moondrops like the True, Aria, Starfields, Kato, and Variations. Not only can the vocals sound thin and pushed back, but they're also a bit light and too distant and not engaging. They lack the vocal texture and nuance, and they're also very sharp at high volumes. Not to mention, the staging on them is average to above average at best with pretty much no 3D. Now soundstage is mostly psychoacoustics, but what do I mean by 3D staging and what makes a stage presentation great to me personally? Well, first there needs to be enough width, height, and depth so it doesn't feel like you're being crammed into a box, which is mostly in the treble and air area, but there are also many ways to achieve this through tuning, but more on this later. Second, the imaging needs to be fast in both the attack and decay and accurate so the sound can come from multiple different distinct directions instead of appearing as like a big blob of sound. And finally, in order to be 3D, you need accurate and fast imaging, but also a specific space with good height and depth, and most importantly, very wide. So the width should be more than the height and depth, otherwise the sound would just be coming from mostly in front of you, like pretty much all of Moondrop's IEMs, primarily flat and ahead instead of from all over, which creates the 3D effect. So an average and good staging usually looks something like a 90 degrees cone, where the stage usually has more depth, whereas a more 3D soundstage is much more expansive and spreads to 180 degrees within a wider angle and area from where the sound can come from. So here's where most of the IEMs I heard falls flat. Their staging is mostly, if not all, flat and cone shaped. For example, even though the ER2XR and Oxygen have great vocals, they don't live up in terms of staging, and although not entirely flat, they're nowhere as 3D as the DM, which also scales much better at higher volume. As for cheaper sets like the Zeros, Warner, Cadenza, I won't dive too deep into those since, yeah, the tuning is very well done with balanced vocals, but they don't do anything amazing in terms of staging, vocal texture, scaling, and just in general an overall downgrade in tech. As for Melee and Kai, yeah, the scaling is great and the vocals are forward, but they lack texture and air as well as the stage size and just technicalities in general. The Hana 2021, on the other hand, is actually my favorite bass set under $300 after you mod it with more filters. The low end is super heavy and rumbly, slams really hard, and also scales super well and is recommended to listen at higher volumes. but vocals are pushed back as well as the stage just being okay. Some other sets would be the Vortex and the Serial, which is a more V-shaped DM with similar tuning, and their note weight is very good, and low end texture is actually better than the DM, but the staging and scaling isn't at the same level, as well as vocals, although are correct, just don't hit like the Dark Magician. On the other hand, the Olina's stage is actually pretty expansive with great 3D, but the vocals are sometimes too light and lacking note weight and bite. Scaling wise, it can also get sharp at higher volumes even after the mod. Then lastly, in terms of pure detail and note sharpness, the IE600 is still better, but it also sounds sharp even at around 75 to 80 decibels with average vocal performance and a significantly smaller non-3D stage. Alright, so what makes the DM so special then? Well, first, the stage is huge and immersive with 3D-like presentation as sounds come from around and behind me. Probably up there with the U12T and Z1R in terms of pure stage size, but more 3D. Scaling wise, I can crank this bad boy up 85 decibels plus, no issues, since the dynamics are incredibly smooth with an even elevation transitioning from the mids to the highs. There's never any huge dips and peaks as the graph is pretty much a straight line up to 1K. It's also incredibly coherent since it's a single driver with no wonky or unnatural crossovers. But where the magic happens is that normally vocal texture and forwardness is often traded for soundstage, making vocals sound thin with a light note weight and recessed due to more air, or two, worse volume scaling, since the more forward the vocals are, the sharper the upper mids tend to be, which leads to harshness with increased volume and leads to bad scaling. Now, I can't think of an IEM that does all three amazingly at the same time: hybrid, tribrid, planners, whatever driver. Even as airy and as expansive as the stages on the U12T and Z1R, their vocals still sound pushed back, thin, and light at times. But my man Ethan truly did the impossible. Paper? Fire? Nah, the DM is one of the most impressive inventions, period. I never experienced vocals that are not only forward and textured with bite, but also airy and open at the same time while being bombarded by an expansive 3D stage and being non-sibilant at the same time. But of course, as perfect as the DM is, even the GOAT also has some drawbacks. For instance, although the mid bass is fast and slams pretty hard, the sub bass still lacks that rumble and just energy in general. The DM also takes a step down in terms of micro details from other sets like the IE600 and the top of the line separation of the U12T. But those aside, note weight, coherency, and timbre is close to perfection. Imaging is sharp and precise, and separation and resolution is still competitive at its price point, which tends to vary from $350 to $500. The treble is also satisfying with good bite and plenty of air, along with a very clean and detailed mid-range. In conclusion, the Dark Magician gets a 5,000 for attack and defense, and easily an S if not more for the tuning, and an A for tech. Now, I'd avoid using large tips that completely cover the nozzle and this dot here, and don't shove it super deeply in your ear since it takes away the air, but still, do get a good seal though. Some albums I highly recommend with the DM are the new Father John Misty and Ethel Cain album, especially A House in Nebraska. The DM took me to a whole other dimension on that song. And some other albums would be Hope and New World by Hua, Spelling Wheel, Daddy's Home, any Daft Punk, Wade's Blood, and We're on Drugs album. Any recent Lana Del Rey and Taylor Swift also slaps. I mean, really, anything sounds amazing on it. Okay, maybe besides trap and drill. Sorry again, bass heads, go grab the Hannah 2021 if you want that bass. But make sure you do the double Hannah filter mod. But yeah, thanks for listening to me fanboy over the Dark Magician. Drop your thoughts below and see you guys next video. Peace.